you offer your perspective on stablecoins?
Because you can think of a stablecoin as being one of two models. So that's why it's outside of Bitcoin. It's one of the few areas that I've been bullish on is the proliferation of stablecoins, because
I think this has sparked more conversation surrounding stablecoins, and certainly we might have some regulations sooner as the result of the Luna Terra situation. But can you offer your perspective on stablecoins? Because we've been hearing panels that talk about how in the developing world, people need access to the dollar, and stablecoins really have been the answer. So what are your thoughts on stablecoins? And specifically, Luna was an algorithmic stablecoin. So is there any difference in terms of whether you think one or the other is better?
But yeah, there's a major difference. Algorithmic stablecoins have been fraught with failure. This is not the first one that blew up. This is the biggest one, but there's been multiple blowups for algorithmic stablecoins. So it's just inherently an unstable design. Whereas fiat collateralized stablecoins, they have risks. I mean, they're centralized. You have to trust that them and their accounting firm are auditing it properly. But for a lot of people, if you're in say Lebanon or Argentina, if you store dollars in the bank, they can be forcibly converted into local currency, so you can lose your protection there. So in many cases, trusting an outside and for them an international organization to kind of custody their dollars is preferable to trusting a local custodian. And so for whatever risk that might have, they perceive it, I think in many cases rightly, as less risk than domestic banks for dollar holdings. And then especially for people who you don't have a ton of excess savings, you can't withstand 30% volatility, 50% volatility on your asset. So a lot of them at the current time, the way the market's structured, need dollars.
Yeah.
So that's why it's outside of Bitcoin. It's one of the few areas that I've been bullish on is the proliferation of stablecoins, because a lot of them are just used for trading, which I'm not. I don't think that's a very sustainable market overall. But then the actual payments, there's a decent amount of activity there. And so, it's got downsides, but I think it's an important part of the market.
Can you simplify what Terra is? Because that'll essentially enable stablecoins on top of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, so the funny thing is Tether started on top of Bitcoin on Omni, and eventually it migrated onto other things that were more suitable for it. Terra is a protocol proposed by Lightning Labs that's based on the Taproot soft fork that allows them to put assets on Bitcoin and Lightning. And so if that's successful, the most obvious use case is stablecoins, because in theory the Lightning Network is one of the best places to have stablecoins because it's so fast and cheap compared to even the altcoin undecentralized networks. This one, it runs on Bitcoin base layer, but then you get the speed that's rivals any of the altcoins out there. And so I think that's all else being equal, I'd rather see stablecoins on Bitcoin than elsewhere.
For sure. The Luna situation, I think, it prompted questions about Tether and whether there was going to be a run on the bank with Tether. But some people said that, essentially the network has shown resiliency because people were trying to cash out and they were able to. So any thoughts on Tether?
Well, that shows the difference between a fiat collateralized stablecoin and an algorithmic one. And so I've not been raising warnings about Tether the same way I was raising warnings about Terra. I think that there are still challenges about collateralization, for Tether, because you can think of a stablecoin as being one of two models. If your assets and your liabilities are identical, at the same amount, then your assets better be risk-free, because if you lose any percentage of them, you're now underwater. On the other hand, you can have more like a bank model where you can take some risk with your assets, but then you better have a capital buffer. Like your assets should be bigger than your liabilities, so even if you lose a percentage of them, you don't go below your liabilities. And so we see a lot with USDC, they shifted over to be 100% cash and T-bills, and Tether's kind of moving in that direction, where right now they still have that mix of other collateral, but then we don't know if they have a capital buffer. And so, personally I would rate Tether below USDC in terms of, say, the assurances that it's a perfectly one-to-one pegged in all conditions. But I don't have the same kind of total systemic concerns about it the same way that I did with Terra Luna.
What do you think should happen when one of these essentially experiments within crypto fails and people literally lose their life savings?
Well, I think there's a difference between an experiment and something that actively preys on people. I mean, I was talking to someone here from Argentina, and they were saying that a lot of Argentinians that don't have a lot of money got caught up in this, right? So they saw 20% yields, and they're like, and not everybody's financially literate, And then there's a trap. I mean, in a lot of markets, because of high inflation, 20% yields are not uncommon.
Right.
Even, of course, 20% yields on dollars should raise some red flags. And so a lot of people just didn't know the difference, and they bought into it. And it's because it was marketed as a stable coin. It was marketed as something that's not speculative, even though anyone who actually understands the technical details understood the risk.
Right.
But not a lot of people can be expected to. So I think there's a difference between saying, you know, here's a proposal, here's some cool ideas, versus actively pulling people in with purposely artificial yields that are VC funded to try to make it as big as possible. That's different than just an experiment. So I think that has more legal implications because you're preying on people.
Well, I think that a lot of people are looking for that yield because of the situation we're in, because inflation is so high and people are feeling left behind and squeezed in every direction. So let's talk a little bit more about the market sell-off and the bigger macro picture.